Can you hear me? Yeah, that's good. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, good morning everyone here. We are going to start this event that will be about public policies in restoration in Latin America and how we can streamline them to achieve the NDC targets, all in mitigation and adaptation. To start, we are going to start with the welcome words by the Minister of Environment from El Salvador, Ministro Fernando López Larrainag. And if you can give us the honor to give the welcome and the opening, please.
Good morning. It's an honor for me to be opening this event, to be part of the 2020 initiative as well. We have big challenges, but also we have big opportunities to implement actions and to achieve our global goals. I welcome everyone, especially the Latin American countries that are represented here, because we share a common goal. I mean, the restoration and the conservation of our degraded ecosystems and landscapes definitely is a very efficient strategy to adapt to climate change, improves food, water security, and many other challenges. We are facing climate events in our region, and I'm going to speak about my region to give you guys a scope of what we're facing. We're facing challenges that need us to adapt to climate change. Meteorological events, we have landslides, floodings, and all these emergencies caused by climate change. So restoration has to be done, and it's a process with many elements, which makes very important the participation of many actors in society. It's not just the task of the government, but also we definitely need the involvement of every citizen, the involvement of the private sector. Without the private sector, we won't be able to advance as a planet. In our country, we have prioritized the construction of the incentives program based in a political decision at the highest level, and improving a local framework to unify the commitments of every key actor from the government and also from the private sector. We have updated also the environmental compensation metric, migrating towards an ecosystem approach and a net loss or a net gain in biodiversity, and promoting nature-based solutions. What are nature-based solutions? Basically, adapting, restoring, planting trees, helping our environment, rebuilding what has been lost. So within this framework, we have prepared, designed, and we are now implementing economic and financial incentives to support this process. The program has just started, and we have many good experiences that we'd like to share. For example, the strengthening, the capacity building of knowledge in the public institutions. That has been one of the best things that has happened. The joint construction of long-term incentives with the support of key partners. The long-term incentives have to do with our common goals. I mean, obviously, if you're looking at this from a private point of view, obviously the private sector has one goal, which is okay, and that is profit. I mean, but we have, and as Minister of Environment, as the organization that manages the restoration and has to do with the implementation of all these programs, we are kind of in the middle of the economic development and the care for the ecosystems. So I know that all countries, like Colombia, for example, also has many good experiences, many significant progress in these areas. We have seen many private companies from all over Latin America progressing in these areas, going greener, as they call it. You know, going for us, anything that means going greener is great. So basically, this shared vision of what nature solutions imply and how can we involve the private sector plays a key role in order to restore our ecosystems. So thank you for inviting me. I encourage every one of you to take part of restoration, and I also thank the 2020 initiative and the Accelerator of Public Incentive Policies for supporting the National Ministry of Environment of El Salvador in this great task. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you to the Minister of Environment from El Salvador. El Salvador has a long history on restoration. Actually, the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration was born in El Salvador. They proposed that first to the United Nations, and they are the leaders in the region. They have committed to restore half of the country, which is 1 million hectares, which is a big challenge for a country with a lot of threats from climate change. So continuing with the program, we are going to make a small change because the negotiations at COP are getting to the final stage, and people is still busy with many other commitments. So we will move some points from the program. But now I would like to give the word to André Weidenhaupt to come here. He's from the Ministry of Climate Change and Development from Luxembourg, and to give us also an introductory words to the panel so we can start with the presentation. So André, please.
Is that yours? Okay, good. Dear Minister, dear René, distinguished panelists, dear colleagues, good morning or good afternoon or whatever, wherever you listen to us. You might be astonished seeing a person from Luxembourg with a non-very Hispanic name speaking to a more Latin American audience. Well, that's because we have been one of the funders for the 20 by 20 project that is run by the World Resources Institute for the last few years, and we have we are basically at the cornerstone where we have finished our first initial cooperation period, and we now move to a next phase. Why doing so? Well, Luxembourg is one of the, together with Sweden, one of the per capita highest contributor to the $100 billion goal, and also a very large contributor to international climate finance. We are a little bit small, so our money is not big figures, but anyway, because it's not big figures, we try to be very selective when we choose our projects. And okay, thank you. And basically, the 20 by 20 project is a typical project for Luxembourg because it's a project that helps scaling up. Basically, we have an idea, and then we multiply the idea with different actors, and that's classically the way how our projects are set up. And I come back to other projects in your region, but I think that's one of the important elements. Another important element is the landscape and nature restoration, land restoration part of the project, because we think that projects that not exclusively address climate change mitigation in its classical way are very important when it comes to face climate change. And landscape restoration, which is also somehow nature restoration, or which is nature-based solutions, which is a classical project stream that is fit for several purposes. It is fit for facing climate change, but it is also fit for facing the biodiversity crisis and maybe also some of the other crises. But anyway, these two are definitely addressed, and we think this type of projects is a typical win-win situation, and that was one of the other reasons why we were, let's say, why we first got into contact with the World Resources Institute for this 20 by 20 initiative, but how we also intend to continue. I think this 20 by 20 pledge, that was these 20 hectares of land restoration, 20 million hectares of land restoration by 2020, and now the new 2030 targets, which is 100 million hectares of restoration. And what is also very important, it's a little bit a nexus project. So it focuses on policy engagement, but also community level work. We always in Luxembourg think that you need to be very inclusive and to have local communities associated. So this is basically also a very important element of the project. And then last not least, the private sector finance mobilization. I think if you do an assemblage of these, that's typically a project that we think as Luxembourg very important to go into. If I look into what we are doing as other projects, and I only pick a few because I was told to address a little bit the issue of the engagement of Luxembourg in the Latin American countries, we also initiated a project in Chile that was basically initiated during the Chile-Madrid COP, if I may call it like that, because basically it was a Chilean COP, but it happened in Madrid. And there we have launched a pilot program for national and regional scale-up of waste management, communities, climate change and circular economy. And in addition to this, we have put agenda and climate change issue in it. And we had, in this respect also, in principle, UNDP as a co-finance. And we had currently, not later than yesterday, had a bilateral ministerial meeting between our minister and the Chilean minister, where we intend also to scale this up to a more regional scale in the surrounding countries in Latin America, together with UN Women. And I think that's also very important to have the gender issue also mainstreamed into climate policy projects. Then a project where, and that's my second last project, that's a little bit closer to what's happening in the 20 by 20 initiative. Luxembourg has launched the so-called Forestry and Climate Change Fund. This is a fund where our ministry de-risks, and we have 2 Luxembourg banks and 1 Luxembourg insurance company and some smaller investors, but all in Luxembourg. And now you think, what's this with Latin America? It's Luxembourgish investors. Well, they invest in a sustainable management of secondary forests in Central America. So countries as El Salvador are targeted, but also Costa Rica and other countries, Guatemala. And it is, in a way, an exploration of the, and also, and basically the project is private investor driven. So we only de-risk, but we made sure that Luxembourgish private banks invested in projects in Central America. And I think that's very important, because we will not realize everything by only public money. We need to have private investors that go also in this way. So I think that's also a very important message that I want to convey, the scaling up by attracting private investors. Last not least, if I say scaling up by private investors, we have set up what we call the Restoration Seed Capital Facility for private sector engagement together with Germany, that is implemented by UNEP and the Frankfurt School for Finance. And there we try to make sure that land restoration projects can get bankable and can attract private investors. And basically, I think that would also be a very interesting nexus for the project stream that we have together with the World Resources Institute, because in this project we look into forest landscape restoration, climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and the conservation to sustainable livelihoods, also with a gender component. So I think this is a little bit an assemblage what Luxembourg is doing, but I think there's a lot of communalities, and I think there's still a lot of opportunities to go further. Having said this, I only want to bring some appetite to the table and also some appetite to the panel, and I'm very sorry that I cannot stay for the whole panel because we are completely stuck in negotiations, and that's always a little bit the problem towards the end of the COP. So I'm very sorry that I cannot stay with you all the time, but please feel comfortable in our pavilion, and I wish all the panelists and the moderator a very fruitful discussion. And I wish also our common project and the continuation of our work also a big success. Thank you very much.
Okay, we will continue with the program. Now we will have the presentation, which is the keynote that we will do for the introduction, and then we will start with an experts panel from different countries that we have here, where we will touch on some real-world policies that and bottlenecks that we are working on this. So to start with this, I just want to mention, why we are focusing on restoration, and restoration is more about just carbon and mitigation. It's about green jobs, it's about resilience, it's about ecotourism, food security, nutrition, fuel wood, many other things, and income too. So we are not doing restoration just because we want more mitigation. We know that the potential of the region is high, but we are not the big producers of the CO2, no? But so we need to balance all those things. How we restore, when we talk about restoration, it's many things. It's not just the act of restoring or planting trees. We have many things that you can see here, which involve in many cases not planting the trees, like for example peatlands, mangroves, natural forests, conservation, which sometimes people separate conservation from restoration, but basically you cannot talk about conservation or restoration if you are not protecting what you already have. Otherwise, it's a cycle of degradation. No? In terms of policies, I just want to list some of the challenges we have here. But there is why we need policies. We need policies because most of the costs to do the restoration are monetizable. So you need to pay for that. You need to pay for the plan. You need to pay for site preparation and everything. But the benefits on the other side are not all monetizable. They don't have market value. And they don't have market value because many of the things that we are protecting, for example, the habitat for certain species, it's probably unethical to assign a value to that. But because of that, in this case, a landholder or a landowner that wants to do restoration has to pay all the costs but doesn't perceive all the benefits. So that's why we need the state or the government to provide incentives, and there are some of the things that we are addressing in this issue. No? Also, changing policies, when you see that in perspective, people might say changing policies is very difficult. Laws takes years to get there. But reality is we have many laws and regulations in Latin America, no? So we already have a legislation, but the problem is when you operationalize the regulation, that's where the problem exists. So you have all these regulations that basically they are not enforced in the ground, or they are not applied, and then you have all these issues. So with the focus on policies that we will be discussing here, it's more on the regulation side. Usually there is a law, but then there is these technical guidelines that make the policy operational, and those are the ones that we can change without changing the law, which makes the process a little bit more easier than just having that here. The policy cycle, or how we address the topic of incentives, is very key. While we are working with the countries in Initiative 20 by 20 is looking at bottlenecks in certain policies and then trying to understand how we can address those bottlenecks. And we will give you some examples during the presentation, but our expert panel will expand on that more. But basically is, we identify the problem. Once we identify the problem, we need to develop an action plan for addressing that problem, and then trying to explore the solutions. And this is a process that is not done only by the countries, it's with support from many other organizations in the 20 by 20 partnership, basically. That's the component that is more relevant. And once you have the solutions, then you need to implement them, and then you need to monitor. That's a more long-term process, but it's part of that. In synthesis, the process right now is you need to identify what are those leaders among the governments that are willing to change these regulations. Then through the 20 by 20 network, we are trying to make exchanges between countries, because you can learn so much from other countries. It's not an isolated problem. We have many common problems, even with Africa. People say that it's different regions, but there are many countries in Africa that we can learn, and also they can learn from the process in Latin America. And then, we identify the bottlenecks, propose solutions, and monitor the implementation and effectiveness. We have done this right now, the last program was in 6 countries. We have Brazil, Mato Grosso, Minas Gerais, and Sao Paulo, Mexico, Chile, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and El Salvador. They all participated in the program, and they identify policies, and we are in the process of working with the countries to address some of the bottlenecks we identify here. Of course, because of pandemic, we did everything online. So we have sessions every 2 weeks. And at the opening, one of the key aspects here is to have the involvement of the ministers, because they are the ones who can see the challenges that the country has, and also orient their teams so they can do what they have to do to address the bottlenecks. And in this case, we have at that time the Vice President of Costa Rica inaugurating the program. And then we have other experts from the network, including many here and FAO. We have a network of mentors. Many of them are not WRI mentors. Many are just experts that are out there, and we are looking for more. If you're looking at the transmission in YouTube and you are interested in this topic and you can contribute to the countries, let us know. I will give my email at the end. But we are looking to provide support to the countries from different experts that we have. And they are all from Latin America, some are from the United States, we have some from Europe too, and we are planning to incorporate some from Africa as we are opening our program there. We have mentors in Latin America too, that you can see there, which are people that is working at WRI, staff members with different expertise. And the core of the program is in charge of Maggie, me, and and Victoria that is not here, but she's also coordinating part of this program with all our colleagues here that provide support. Examples of what we are working, example in Mexico, they have agricultural districts where they need water to irrigate the crops, and they are building basically a private payment for ecosystem services where they put a lot of money, they collect that money, and then they give that money to the people that is protecting the forests in the upper parts of the watershed. And then CONAFOR, which is the Forest Service in Mexico, provide a matching fund. So every dollar that these farmers are providing to the fund, CONAFOR puts another dollar. So it's a matching system. We are working also with environmental compensations in El Salvador, what the Minister Lopez presented, which is basically a compensation system that can create basically a biodiversity credit market, so it can allow the private sector to also do investments in restoration with a return on biodiversity. And that's almost completed, and they have been leaders in that area too. In the case of Guatemala, basically they already have a program that is called ProBosque that pays farmers to restore land. But right now they don't have the capacity to monitor all the projects, so the demand is higher than the supply, and we are helping them with identifying monitoring systems based on remote sensing, so they can really streamline the process of the applications, and they can have more, basically attend the demand for the program. In Chile, this is very interesting. The analysis was on diversity, equity, and inclusion, just to understand how these incentive programs that are paying for farmers to do restoration are accessible to people. And in that case, we found out that many of the programs are available online in the internet, but not all the people have internet, not all the people have access to the computer, and that makes very difficult for certain groups to access to the program. So we work with them, and basically they are making changes in the system to have other forms, other procedures, so people can apply differently in that. And we are also working in other areas that are not listed here, but very exciting points. What you see here is policies that already exist. We are looking at the regulations and then trying to streamline them, but trying to improve these bottlenecks. We have different models. I will go with this. But again, just to close the loop on this policy acceleration, we need incentives because we need this jump starting. We need development of rural areas and investments, and we need blended finance. We need not only the private sector, but the public sector involved, so they can have all these. We need also to recognize the value of ecosystem services. Carbon has been very famous recently with markets and prices, but it's not a silver bullet, and we need to understand very well how this can play. And carbon for us, in Latin America at least, the way we have been working with the countries is more an incentive, but you cannot depend only on carbon to create a model, no? So we have here, and on the background we have a panel of experts from El Salvador that supported another program that is a monitoring index that El Salvador did for monitoring. So just some research that we have done on this to characterize some of these incentives so you can have a sense of how they work. Basically, we analyze how much, using a simple metric, which is always a challenge, no? But let's take how much per tree these programs are paying, and you can see here how much in terms of dollars, US dollars per tree they are paying. Now we calculated a whole process here with present value. We bring it to the present, and then we calculate different programs that already exist. What you see here is more or less the amount of money that is being paid by governments to plant the trees. Of course, it's much more complicated than that, but we try to do a systematic thing so you can see how much each program supports for reforestation and for agroforestry. So that gives also the private sector a look on how much governments are paying compared to how much the private sector is willing to pay for a tree. Three is very simplified thing. Restoration is more complex than that, but in financial terms, helps people to understand how this might work. Payment for ecosystem services, you can see here how much they pay per hectare. Colombia has a plan, a payment for ecosystem service, the legislation or let's say the policy orientation is there for a national program, but it's not already implemented. We need to operationalize, and we will discuss that later. But that will be the amount per hectare that they are paying. We cannot calculate in this case per tree, because in natural forest we have many trees and varies a lot, no? But you can see, how much these programs are paying, and then Guatemala, Costa Rica, the program that is pretty famous too. Some recommendations for policy that we have been discussing in this report is prioritize. We need to prioritize investments. We need to improve monitoring of transparency of the process, not just hectares or forest cover, but biodiversity, social aspects. We need to revise the mechanism for payments to landowners. Diversification, most of the incentive programs that exist right now focus on more tree planting, but this is much complicated, more species, more things like that. And one important thing is the coherence with the agricultural sector. Sometimes we have more incentives in the ag than in the nature, and then if you are a farmer, maybe it's better to plant corn because you get more incentives for that than restore the area because the payment for ecosystem services is low. If you will see just from the financial perspective, of course, people restore not just for the money, they are willing to restore in some cases, So just ending that, that's what we are creating. We are creating a network of entrepreneurs in public sector. We have some knowledge products that you have seen here. And we will continue working with this through another program that is the monitoring accelerator that my colleague Victoria Ramaninov is coordinating, which is connecting policy with monitoring. I will pass this through just to finalize, and thank you very much, and then we are going to start with the panel. Thanks. So now I would like to invite my panelists to the stage. Please, Clara, Juan, Marco, if you can come here. And we're going to have a discussion on that. And we have Pina Gervasi, which is connected online, and she will join us via Zoom. And I will ask probably, William, if you can help us with the Zoom, so we can have her there. But yeah, just give me a second, and we'll start with the panel. So first, let me introduce our panelists here that are coming here, and we appreciate their time because we know they are busy with other meetings and also the travel here. But first is Clara Solano, which is Executive Director of Fundación Natura. We have Juan Fernando Patiño Diaz, which is Sustainability Director of ISA Conexión Jaguar, or Jaguar Connection, which is a program that we will learn more later. And we will have Pina Gervasi online, which is the Director of Climate Change for FSC International. And we have Marco Tax, which is with the Institute for Climate Change in Guatemala, which is also with us here. So I will go with you here. Okay, we are good with sound now. So Pina, can you hear us well, right? Yes? Okay, perfect. So we're going to start with Clara. First, the discussion on incentives. Clara, you have a lot of experience with policies, projects implementation in the ground in Colombia and other countries probably. So what is your experience with policies in Colombia, and what is needed to accelerate the restoration from the perspective of an organization that is working with civil society?
Gracias, René. Voy a hablar en español y si quieres tú haces un pequeño resumen. ¿Aló? Sí. ¿Aló? Ok.
Yeah.
Gracias, René. Gracias al World Resource Institute por invitarme. Gracias por tener en cuenta el trabajo de la Fundación Natura. Colombia tiene algo maravilloso desde el punto de vista de política pública y que tiene que ver con restauración. Y primero construimos un plan de restauración de largo plazo, que es una política aprobada por el gobierno nacional y que se instaló en el 2015 y tiene una serie de elementos que sin duda han acelerado el proceso de restauración en Colombia en distintos ecosistemas. Y vale la pena recordar algunas metas que son, digamos, importantes, pero también hay que analizar varias cosas. El gobierno anterior se propuso, a través de la siembra de 180 millones de árboles, generar, disparar y acelerar procesos que tienen que ver con restauración. Y esto es muy importante. Si bien la siembra de árboles no es restauración siempre, sí generó algo que es trascendental para el país. Uno, involucró a la empresa privada de manera directa en temas asociados a restauración. Dos, se gestó una política específica que tiene que ver con la empresa privada, el cual obliga a los empresarios a hacer siembras anuales obligatorias, y esto, digamos, está en pleno desarrollo. Es una política que está escrita pero poco desarrollada, ya vamos a ver los retos. Y en este momento algo que es muy importante, porque ya tenemos la política de restauración, pero ahora ¿dónde están los fondos? Entonces pasó algo muy importante en Colombia en la última semana, que yo creo, René, para la iniciativa 20x20 es muy importante estar muy pendiente, y es que la reforma tributaria en el país hizo que un tax al carbón que está desarrollado desde, digamos, está planteado en la política pública desde años atrás, en este momento se haya logrado que el 80% del 100%, el 80% del 100% se destine a conservación, restauración, pago por servicios ambientales. Esto no se había logrado hasta ahora, y por fin van a haber recursos, no de cooperación, sino recursos del país que van a fondear acciones de restauración. Entonces creo que hay varios elementos, Colombia tiene varios elementos muy importantes para acelerar la restauración y las metas que tenemos. Actualmente el actual gobierno está construyendo su plan de desarrollo, y la viceministra de Medio Ambiente de Colombia planteó una meta de 800.000 hectáreas en restauración en los próximos 4 años, de tal manera que cerca de 200.000 hectáreas se estén desarrollando en restauración cada año. Esta es una meta que yo considero es muy ambiciosa, es una meta grande, no solamente, digamos, que se juntan cosas importantes como el fondeo de los recursos, políticas que involucran al sector privado, yo creo que eso es muy positivo, pero tenemos retos muy grandes como país. Primero, el dónde hacer la restauración es un tema muy importante. Un país que está en una transición hacia la paz, que está construyendo un ejercicio después de la guerra, que tiene necesidades muy importantes de resolver en su acuerdo de paz. Entonces, creo que ese es un primer reto, el confluir los programas de restauración con programas en los sitios donde en nuestro país es urgente adelantar acciones también de beneficio social y asociados a la paz. Un segundo y muy importante reto es instrumentalizar todo esto. Colombia tiene un gran, digamos, somos un país que genera normas, que genera leyes, pero somos muy malos en desarrollar las leyes y hacer que las normas se desarrollen en el territorio. Yo creo que este segundo instrumento, este segundo reto es muy importante porque vamos a tener fondos, vamos a tener las estructuras, pero ahora necesitamos desarrollar la operatividad para escalar la restauración, tener impacto a escala de paisaje y, por supuesto, lo que implica medir, hacer seguimiento y mejorar nuestros sistemas de contabilidad de hectáreas restauradas. Eso creo que son los retos más importantes.
Thank you, Clara. Just summarizing for the ones that are online in English, no? Clara was sharing that there is this policy from the carbon tax that now they will relocate the amount that they have before was 25% and now is 80%, 80% will be dedicated from the carbon tax to restoration, but we need to operationalize that, and that will need a lot of procedures and guidelines that need to be in place, and also to operationalize. And also she was mentioning that we have different in Colombia, no? The regulations exist, are there, but we need to operationalize them by implementing the rules in the ground. And that will be a big asset and big incentive for restoration in the country. Continuing with the questions, and now I go with Juan Fernando. Juan Fernando, your view is more from the private sector. You are part of and leader of the Conexión Jaguar program, which is looking into restoring areas for habitat for jaguar, no? So what are your views on policies? What do you need in terms of policies to accelerate the work that you are doing from the private sector? Please.
Thank you, René, and thank you to the Luxembourg and the World Resources Institute for this invitation. And yeah, according to the question and what also Clara says, it is really important to have like real policies, real rules, real incentives to have like mixed sources for financing restoration. That's pretty important. I think that having only one source is never enough, and it's even not sustainable because there are also risks, and we need also to distribute the risks between the actors, between the different sources for financing. In Conexión Jaguar, we support and invest in restoration and conservation projects across Latin America, mainly through the Jaguar corridor, by financing projects to access to the certification of carbon credits under international standards, always including co-benefits in terms of biodiversity and communities. But we have, it's been like more than 5 years by doing this, supporting 9 projects in more than 800,000 hectares across different projects in Latin America, mainly Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Brazil. And now we are like in a plan of expansion of our program in terms of different types of projects, different types of other geographies. And in this expansion, we're looking to increase the investment in restoration. We have lots of projects, mostly RED Plus projects there, but restoration is our focus to start growing every year the investment in this. And the investments in restoration projects are really high, depending on the type of restoration that we are going to do. So for us, from the private sector, is a need. We are looking for co-investment, like maybe blended investment in this type of projects, because we as a program and maybe our logic is to invest the resources that this project needs to start producing, to start implementing activities, to start receiving also income from the carbon credits, but also maybe to start receiving income from the agroforestry activities, for example, not depending only on one source of income, and to make them sustainable. But to make them sustainable in time, we need other types of financing. Like it could comes from the government, from the country, but also it can comes by fundings from cooperation, which are really important to make them sustainable. So at least we have to structure, like I say, like an ecosystem of different actors, private sector, government, international cooperation, to fulfill the whole sustainable business model for these projects in the long term, which is really important for us. So it's a need to establish like this kind of value chain across the different actors to make like whole integral business models for these restoration activities, to make them real sustainable in time, and in terms in all the benefits that these restoration initiatives are going to give to society, as carbon reduction, but also biodiversity, but also the community benefits there. So yeah, it's a real need, and in our plan we're calling different actors and sources of financing to make an integral intervention in these projects.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Juan. Can you hear me? No, está bajito. Sí, ahora sí. Yeah, no, thank you, Juan. Fernando, this is very important. The blended finance issue is something that we have been discussing on policies, and it's important. I think the challenge is building the trust, between the government and the private sector, because there is part of the problem is there is no trust in some of the procedures, and also how we can target some landscapes too, so we don't spread to many places and prioritize, as also Clara was saying. Now we move to Guatemala. So we have Marco Tax here from the Climate Change Institute for Research, and the Climate Change Institute, ICC, works a lot with private sector, especially sugarcane producers, banana producers. So what are and you're doing a lot of restoration of riparian forests too. So how you can scale up that restoration of riparian forests, and also agroforestry and other types of restoration in Guatemala, please.
Thank you very much. As you said, I belong to the Private Institute for Climate Change Research. Everybody is talking about the private sector. I think that we are part of the answer of the private sector in Guatemala, especially in the south. Today I will speak in behalf of my team, of our team, in behalf of a lot of people in our institute. So firstly, I think that it's important to say that our institute was funded by the private sector 2 years ago with the vision of the sugar sector. But right now we are working with banana sector, with avocado, and with other companies, and we have an operation in El Salvador 2 years ago. As institute, we are part of the network for forest restoration at national level in Guatemala, but in the south, we support the government, especially with the connection with the other stakeholders, included the private sector. And this is one of the great policies that we think that we need to have to get the impact in the landscape. Furthermore, that the private sector, we work with the municipalities, communities that are part of the network. With the support of the private sector, every year we produce 1.5 million trees. This was made through kind of 75 nursery trees. That nursery trees are in coordination with the municipalities, with NGOs, with another government institutions. the objective, the main goal of this production is to restore the forest restoration in every part of the basins in the south of Guatemala. About the strategies, we think important to look at the agroforestry systems. Usually when we think in the forest restoration, we have the romantic idea of a great forest with water, with a lot of species. In the south, in Guatemala, and I think in all Latin America, our landscapes include agricultural activities. That includes a lot of kind of producers. In Guatemala, we have sugar producers, banana producers, tobacco producers, corn producers, livestock, etc. And we can't to say them to stop this production, but we can to say how to improve their production system. And this is one of the policies that we are looking for to improve the agro-system producers because principally we found a lot of richness in this kind of landscape. 5 years ago we began with the biodiversity studies, and we found more than 250 species, bird species. The 30% of them are migratory species. We found more than 200 trees in the landscape, and we saw that the agroforestry system in the landscape includes a lot of biodiversity. That was great information to make some advice to the private sector. So this is one point, the agroforestry system. The other policy, René speak about the program of the government, of the forest incentive. This is a great tool that Guatemala have. That's René's show, I think, the amounts of the protection forest, but these programs include a lot of kind of activities, including the agro-system restoration, the forest restoration for protection, the riparian forest. And about the forest restoration, this incentive could represent around $3,500 per hectare during 10 years. And this is a great opportunity for the local producers. This is a great main sources to have the change in the country. I think that this is the main program that make that the dynamic of the forest in some regions are changing, and we have some regions with positive with positive results. And the last one, and this is our main idea, is about the voluntary decision of the sectors to protect the forest and to have the forest restoration. 4 months ago, the sugar sector decided to adopt their own guidelines to protect and restoration the biodiversity in their landscape. This is a voluntary decision that they took, and this decision is part of their voluntary policy about the environment improvement. And this decision includes to protect forests, to protect the water, to protect the biodiversity in the farms, and that includes the forest restoration too. That was a voluntary decision, and I think that is the first step. Right now we are making the technician tools that includes the capacity building of the people who is taking decision in the field. Thank you, René.
Thank you, Marco. And this is very important, how we get companies, not, we are discussing here at COP of the big companies, what they are doing and what they can do more for climate change, but there are a lot of local companies, and producers in the countries that they need to do more, and it seems in Guatemala the sugar sector is being pioneering in implementing these actions, and more sectors need to move, no?
Sugar companies means kind of 200,500 hectares
In Guatemala,
In
which
Guatemala.
is significant for a country was 10 million size, no? Now we will move with our colleague Pina. Pina, I know it's very early where you are right now, but we really appreciate that you are here with us supporting. We will enjoy if you were here, but we know that you had to travel, and please, what is the perspective, Pina, from FSC with the changes that are happening, with the regulations from FSC internally, but also the restoration toolbox and other actions that you are leading to increase the restoration, and what kind of policies do you need to support your work? So back to you, Pina, please.
Thank you very much, Rene, and thanks a lot to Initiative 20 by 20 and WRI for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I will start saying and talking about policy and public policy and the importance of nature-based solutions. As you know, nationally determined contributions in most countries consider nature-based solutions in their targets. And this, of course, includes restoration, conservation, and sustainable forest management, implanted forests, and also natural forests. While around 35% of these countries mention the implementation of activities encompassed in the forest landscape restoration context, only 26% of these mention the actions as quantifiable commitments to be reported upon and measured in achieving the targets within the Paris Agreement. Targets need to be supported with data, monitoring, credible verification, and reporting mechanisms. And this is where sustainable forest management and sustainability standards come in. FSC certification provides the credibility of a robust forest management standard that exists for more than 25 years and a strong third-party verification system for this. In 2019, we created an extension of our forest management certification system to be able to verify the impacts on 5 ecosystem services, which are carbon, biodiversity, water, soil, and recreation. And those impacts are measured through a credible scientific methodology, and these impacts are being communicated in the markets. Up to now, we have around 1 million hectares around the globe and more than 45 forest management operations being able to implement this new procedure and also receiving payments for their ecosystem services. As we know, the links between sustainable forest management and climate change adaptation is also important. It's not only about reducing carbon emissions, but it's also about ensuring forest resilience and also social benefits for people to adapt to climate change. When we talk about the financial sector, the use of sustainability standards have increased significantly in the past years. As an example, the Green Bond Principles, which convenes more than 600 financial institutions worldwide, contemplate the use of sustainability standards as one of the measures that investors need to tackle to be able to demonstrate that their investments are actually delivering positive social and environmental benefits. However, we still have a huge gap in terms of financing nature-based solutions. The last global report, State of Finance for Nature, calls for investments in nature-based solutions to triple by 2030 and close a $4 trillion financing gap in nature-based solutions by 2050. And we know that currently about 60% of investments in nature is coming from the public sector. So we still have a huge challenge here to collaborate and work together with investors and companies to increase the investment in nature-based solutions. FSC is working together with our partners to co-create these solutions and address these challenges. For example, now we as observers of the Green Bond Principles are discussing together with this big network of financial institutions the use of KPIs for their own investment reportings, and also collaborating with other sectors such as carbon standards, project developers, reporting and disclosure initiatives to be able to integrate and align better the work that we do, our standards, the way to implement them, and therefore make them more accessible also for smallholders, indigenous peoples, and companies around the globe. Last week, during COP27, we launched the FSC Climate Coalition to make these solutions, to co-create these solutions and deliver a better work and more integrated work between key organizations, also including NGOs. We are now also in the process of developing what we call the FSC Restoration Toolbox, which aims to respond to some of the challenge on restoration, including what is the right species, what is the right place to make restoration, what is the right scale and the right purpose of restoration. In that sense, we are collaborating with Initiative 20 by 20 and other partners to make these solutions and also update the tools that have been developed by others and better align the work we're doing together. Also, and finally, the importance of connecting investments with projects on the ground, I think is becoming increasingly relevant. Through Initiative 20 by 20, our partners and the amount of companies and the big network that we have in the FSC system, more than 50,000 companies certified around the globe, we are also facilitating the connections between forest projects, FSC certified with other certifications, and impact investors. In that sense, we launched a couple of years ago an initiative called Innovature with WRI, also on 20 by 20 as a partner, and also we are committed to keep supporting the Land Accelerator and the Policy Accelerator, as we believe that it's really important that we develop the capacities of decision makers and governments, and not only that, to build a dialogue and develop the right narrative and language so these different sectors can speak to each other. And finally, my last comment, and again talking about finance and how to deliver and verify these positive impacts from investments and nature-based solutions, I would really like us to stop thinking on ESGs as only environmental, social governance, and environmental meaning more emissions, and we start thinking more on ecosystems. The E of environment needs to consider the whole branch of ecosystems that we have in the world, as they are basically the ones that will support human life, biodiversity over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pina. That was really excellent, and you covered all the parts and the importance again of public finance, but also private finance to get to the targets that we have. Also, thank you also for being supportive of 20 by 20, and let's continue the discussion. So now we have just one more question for our panelists, which is related to, you know, if there is one thing you can change on policies, what you would like to change in the context of the work that you are doing in the region. Your views from your different perspectives will be much appreciated, and basically we need to finance more people to do restoration, not only from the public sector, but also from the private sector. And the key is what kind of policies do we really need to accelerate that and reach the 50 million target of 20 by 20 to 2030. So please, Clara, if you can share with us what are your thoughts?
One thing. Yo creería que en el caso de Colombia, que no tiene una economía forestal desarrollada como la tienen otros países de Latinoamérica, como Perú tal vez, Yo creo que la restauración tiene que basarse también en una política que tenga un muy fuerte contenido forestal. ¿Por qué digo esto? Para mí es muy importante que tenga mucho valor el uso del bosque, no solamente de los no maderables, sino de los maderables. Y esto se junta con restauración porque la restauración puede tener ese objetivo productivo y no solamente tener objetivos de restaurar biodiversidad y servicios ecosistémicos, sino también restaurar para hacer productiva la tierra. Y en esto creo que no hemos avanzado mucho en nuestro país y yo creo que esa es una fuerza muy, muy importante que hay que darle a nuestra política. Y tal vez una segunda idea mucho más práctica, y es, Colombia es un país grande con muchísimos, digamos, retos en restauración, en ecosistemas muy degradados, severamente perdidos. Y yo sí creo que es muy importante hacer la prueba para tener realmente un impacto a escala de paisaje. Si de estos, digamos, ¿qué es lo que necesitamos? Se trata no solamente de tener impactos leves, sino un gran impacto a escala de paisaje para medirnos como sociedad científica, como sociedad de políticas, como sociedad que incluye campesinos locales, tener un gran proyecto, enfocar todos los recursos, no todos, pero sí la mayoría y la gran cantidad de esfuerzo para lograr un área con un impacto a escala de paisaje proyectado en el largo plazo. Si esto lo hiciéramos, podríamos obtener información, sistematizar necesidades operativas, medirnos también en cómo monitorear y hacer seguimiento a los objetivos de restauración. Yo creo que es necesario. Yo conozco en Colombia realmente, y he trabajado restauración muchos años, pero conozco muy pocos ejemplos de restauración a escala de paisaje con procesos de medición de sus objetivos. Inclusive si se ha aplicado manejo adaptativo o no, realmente es muy poco. Y yo sí hago un llamado a que hay que hacer esfuerzos concentrados para poder conocernos desde la disciplina de la restauración, desde el efecto, desde el monitoreo, desde los efectos colaterales sociales, desde la gobernanza de la restauración, cómo debemos hacerlo para ajustar las políticas. No lo tenemos todavía. Tenemos acciones, pero no tenemos realmente concentración y creo que eso es necesario hacerlo.
No, thank you, Clara. The point that you are saying is very important. Basically, you know, the concentrating or identifying priority landscapes is really key, because then you can channel the resources and blended finance, as Juan Fernando was mentioning, in one place and then monitor and then test and then scale if that works or not. That's an important point. And the other one that Clara was mentioning too, which I highlight importantly, is the value change. No, when we do restoration, if we rely on incentives from the government, we will create dependence, no, and that's not what we want. We want to develop new ways. So the practice that we are changing really is sustainable in the long term for the communities, no, and that might take, you know, taking non-timber and timber forest products in a sustainable way. And that's a viable solution also for this, not thinking on dependence on the governments, which is really challenging. So with Juan Fernando, what are your views on this from your perspective, from the private sector and Conexión Jaguar?
Yes, thank you, Rene. I think that there are different points which are needed to increase the impact and to scale the impact of restoration. I think that one is really important to strengthen the incentives for restoration. You know, normally in countries like Colombia, we used to have the incentive for forest projects, you know, the certified forestry incentive, but that was more in terms of the value of the production of timber or forest production, but we need to add more value to those kind of incentives in terms of the environmental services that these different types of restorations are going to give to society. That's pretty important. I think that the other point is, which is really important, as Clara says, for taking the restoration into a landscape scale, it's pretty important maybe to do like some kind of zonification and prioritize areas, because restoration, but restoration for what? Where we need to restore, which are the priority areas for restoring, which normally corresponds to the most degraded, you know, it's just for recover, to restore all the environment, all the ecosystem and their services. So that's pretty important, and that's in some way how we work at Conexión Jaguar, because we're trying to work to contribute to connectivity, which is really important. And connectivity only not by conserving the connectivity in some specific places like natural parks and stuff like that, but how can we recover connectivity between those conserved areas? And that happens through this logic of corridors, and connectivity for ecosystem services is really important. Also for species, for biodiversity, it's pretty important. So how can we prioritize some areas, corridors at a landscape scale to do this? That's really important. And also to prioritize the investment and the resources for specific areas that really need that thing, because we're also talking about adaptation, you know. So we need to restore and focus on restoration where the adaptation is more, where territories are more vulnerable, you know, in terms of risks and services to communities. And that thing is pretty important. A zonification of the restoration is really important. And well, from the private sectors and from initiatives as Conexión Jaguar, for us it's pretty important to make the tools compatible with private financing, with private action. And I also talking about the jurisdictional programs in each country, which sometimes are designed excluding the private sector. Only resources from the government and from cooperation, and no one else can enter there. For example, like in the Amazon areas and stuff like that. And we're talking this point with the government, for example, how can we coordinate, we articulate both fundings for helping specific areas. Yeah, maybe from private sector we cannot work at that scale at a country level, but we can contribute in specific areas, making synergy with these jurisdictional programs from the governments. So that's very important also, to make these synergies available, and the tools have to work for that.
Thank you, Juan Fernando. Yeah, that's very important. So basically diversifying the mechanism, so you focus on restoration, not only on tree planting, and also to improve connectivity as you are doing for the private sector. So Marco, what are your thoughts on that question on policies? Although Probosque is very good, but if you have to change something, what you will change in Guatemala?
I think that we need to strengthen the point of view related to the benefit of the forest, the profits that the producer can get to the forest. Don't matter if they produce timber or non-timber products, they need to have some incomes that motivate their effort. They need to see an additional motivation. Doesn't matter if they are small or big producers. Our incentive programs has kind of 25 years, and we need to have this change of point of view in the government and in the technician and in the producers too. I think that we need to have this change of mind. In our experience in the South, a lot of persons that receive the trees we produce, usually they don't have participation in the program of incentive of the government, but they are looking of the benefit of their production. We think that this is the way. When we get back to kind of 5-7 years after the forest, they usually share with us their experience about the profits of their trees. I think that that is a great motivation to change that point of view, to change the mind of the person, to have the next step of the traditional system production in the, especially in the agricultural landscapes.
Thank you, Marco. So that's very important too, and it connects with what Clara was saying, the value change and how we can generate so we don't depend on the government by creating these policy instruments, no? So Pina, now back to you on the same question. You look from your perspective why you will change in policy.
Thank you, Rene. I would like to start with a couple of figures that I think are quite important for what I believe it's a big challenge, at the same time a big opportunity to connect public policy and private action. In the latest report of the Ecosystem Marketplace, it is said that in the next couple of years, the provision of carbon credits from current large-scale forestry operations will be almost depleted by the increasing demand, and this will imply that the future is in the areas that are managed by indigenous peoples, communities, and smallholders. So in that sense, Latin America has a huge opportunity. At the same time, it also says that when these carbon credits come with verified co-benefits, I don't like the word co-benefits because I think that biodiversity and social values are much as important as carbon and climate values. But it is also said in that report that in many cases, the prices of carbon credits in these type of operations triple the price of carbon credits that do not come with the co-benefits that can be verifiable. So again, a huge opportunity in Latin America for indigenous peoples, communities, and smallholders. And that's my biggest message here, the challenge of financing projects that are managed by communities to make them bankable, scalable. I still see that there is very few cases of success in many regions, not only in Latin America on this, and I think that we need to work together to make this happen. And of course, ensure that this is providing real social benefits and just rights for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Pina. That's very important too, and connects with what we have all discussed here: the importance of incentives, the importance of generating value change out of these resources. We want to thank our panelists that are here today for being here, because we know everybody is busy here at COP. We apologize for the background noise for our colleagues that are online in the YouTube channel. I saw that there is like 30 persons connected, and we appreciate that if you are in Latin America, it's very early, so we appreciate that you get connected, but the recording will be there, and we will translate that into Spanish and Portuguese later, so it will be available in 3 languages, basically, English, Spanish, and Portuguese, in about a week or so. And again, this is a big challenge, but the key factor here is we need to generate these incentives, but not incentives that create dependence on the governments, but incentives that really develop the capacities and investments on that. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next session. Thank you.
See you.